We are born free.
And we will die free.
The time in between, though,
That's complicated.
in that time, governments, institutions, and our egos will limit our ability to find true freedom in this life. These are real stories of real people overcoming the odds, persevering in justice, and unlocking their potential. Welcome to Finding Freedom. Here's your host, John Odermatt.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Finding Freedom right here on the Lions of Liberty Network. Of course, if you're new to this show, there's two ways to listen to this podcast, either on the Lions of Liberty Network feed or on my Finding Freedom solo feed, which you can find by searching Finding Freedom and John Odermatt. If you're watching on YouTube, we do have over 6,000 YouTube subscribers. Of course, we're shadow banned, so only like 80 to 100 people get to see it. We can't do super chats. We can't monetize. But if you are watching on YouTube or on Odyssey or Rumble, because we're expanding those platforms as well, you'll see my video feed right now is really strange. I'm disappearing into the background. But it is what it is. I'll worry about that another time. I want to get to today's show. A really awesome show with two guests today who wrote a book debunking the Communist Manifesto. And really, it's more than just debunking the crazy ideas in the Communist Manifesto. More so, it's mapping out a future of how really individuals can find freedom in today's world and how we're going to expand that freedom going forward, the tools and platforms we can use. So really excited to get to that interview. I just want to remind you, if you're enjoying this show, we have, of course, my show every Monday, Finding Freedom. We have Brian's show every Wednesday, Mean Age Daydream. And we have a new show every Friday, Meme Wars. And if that's not enough for you, which I can understand if it's not enough for you, we do have bonus shows in our Patreon feed or at locals.com, lionsofliberty.locals.com or patreon.com/lionsofliberty. We have, during the fall and into the winter, we have a show every Friday called Degenerate Gamblers, where we just really talk about random stuff and talk about a little bit of sports betting. And we have our new conspiracy show, Secrets, Lies, and Cover-Ups. And you have every single weekday, Brian McWilliams brings you Good Morning Bleephead. And yeah, so if you want more content, please become a Patreon of Lions of Liberty for as little as $5 a month. All right, let's waste no more time and get into today's show. We are live to the Lions of Liberty Pride. I'm joined here today by two guests. I'm joined by Aleks Svetski and Mark Moss. They are the co-authors of the Uncommunist Manifesto. And as they describe this book, in the book, it's counter-inspired by the infamous Communist Manifesto. You might have guessed that. Of course, that was written by Marx and Engels. This short book, The Uncommunist Manifesto, hopes to challenge what may be unconsciously acquired biases and beliefs people all walks of life are carrying with them. Mark and Aleks, welcome to Finding Freedom.
Thank you, John.
Thanks so much, John.
Great to have you guys here. I know we had a little bit of trouble scheduling this for a couple of weeks. We're all in very different time zones, and getting that to work out took some time, but I'm glad we were able to make this work. So excited for this conversation. I think a good place to start before we get to the book, just to familiarize my audience with each of you, if you could each start out giving some background on yourself and maybe what led you, what was the catalyst to bring you to these ideas of liberty. And let's start with Aleks, since you're clockwise on the screen.
All right, so I guess this is beauty before age. All right, let's do it. So what brought me to this? I think I wrote a little essay recently called Bitcoin is Responsibility Go Up Technology, and in there I described how since being young I was always very freedom oriented. I've always been a bit of a I've always been, how can I say? I've always pushed the envelope of things, and I've always kind of been my own man, making my own decisions. And I think I've always just had that grain of freedom. Like in my values hierarchy, freedom has definitely always been at the top. And I didn't really get into any Austrian econ or anything like that until after I discovered Bitcoin. Like in 2011, I stumbled along, the Max Kaisers and Mike Maloney's and all those of the world when it was sort of post GFC, the crash had happened, and I was a dumb, what was I, 18, 19, 20 basically in university during the GFC. And I had taken all of my money and placed it on the stock market, gambled my way into a small fortune, and then gambled my way into $250,000 in debt by the time I turned 20. And that sort of put me on a journey to learn. And I became a bit of a gold silver bug. I bought that stuff. I kind of had a bit of exposure to sort of Austrian economics, but nothing more than that. And then the rest of my life was very entrepreneurial. So once again, freedom oriented. I wanted to work for myself. I didn't want to be under anyone else's thing. I wanted to just make my own decisions, all that. And yeah, it was really when I discovered Bitcoin again that I started doing a lot of thinking, a lot of digging. I've always read a lot, but during that sort of phase of my life between, say, 2012 and 2016, 90% of my reading was entrepreneurial books, business, management, all of that sort of stuff. And Bitcoin kind of, I guess, in many people, it's almost like a renaissance of like thinking. And as I started digging, I found my way into Austrian economics, into libertarian thinking, and it all just made so much sense to me because in my mind, like, it was always, if you want anything in life, you need to work for it first. You need to sow before you reap. Like all those sorts of things made sense to me because I was entrepreneurial in nature. So yeah, here I am, 2022. Last couple of years, I think, radicalized a lot of us, which sort of showed us how important these libertarian Austrian econ principles are. And yeah, I've been writing more publicly since 2016 on a regular basis, and Mark and I decided to get together and write this book at the beginning of the year, which is sort of my first foray, both of our first forays actually, into writing books, and I think there's going to be a lot more to come. So anyway, that's a bit of a brief overview on me.
All right, Mark, you're up.
Good. We're on a freedom-minded podcast, so talking about that, I think, I kind of grew up that way. I'm not somebody who was like red-pilled at some point. My grandfather was a decorated World War II vet. My father was a Vietnam vet, and I was born into like an Air Force family. So I kind of just figured that was like my path, right? Fighting for freedom, kind of a thing. Politics is something that was always discussed, still discussed around our kitchen table. So kind of always kind of grown up around that. I started my career early, just right into real estate investing, and kind of started right as a real estate investor. I also started multiple businesses, had Fortune 500 exit, made a lot of money, and then in 2008, when the Great Financial Crash happened, I got just blasted, like millions of other Americans did. And it made me realize that even though like I could kind of control what I could see, and I was pretty good at business and making money, there was like this whole financial system that I didn't understand what was going on. And so I had to go figure that out. And so kind of like what Alex said, it was kind of like Mike Maloney and gold. And it was like, oh my gosh, this is the whole problem, the fiat money system. And we need to go back to a sound money system and gold. And so that kind of pulled me into that, the sound money, Austrian economics thing, where I've kind of spent the better part of now about a dozen years or so. So always been freedom-minded. Being freedom-minded, I was, obviously really concerned with the way things were going. And I remember like 2012, 2013, just being really disillusioned with the way things were going. And I first bought Bitcoin in 2015, and I realized like, wow, we actually have a tool that we can win with now. Now it's not hopeless. I actually have hope now, something we can actually change the system with other than just hoping, praying, and voting. And so I thought, well, shoot, I need to tell everybody I can about this. And so I've been creating content specifically around that for about 6-7 years now at this point, and really kind of focusing on the freedom aspects of it. controlling our private property, how that can free us up. And I've become an educator. So now I'm educating people. I have a nationally syndicated radio show. I have a podcast. I have a pretty big YouTube channel, and all different outlets with different types of education, just trying to educate people to what's going on. And so the book was sort of as Alex said, is our first foray into writing, but it was sort of a natural progression where I'm trying to get these ideas out as best as I can into as many people's minds as I can, following Samuel Adams' advice that it doesn't take a majority to prevail, but rather a minority keen on setting brush fires in the minds of men. And so through this education, we can share this. And so, just on a mission to educate as many people as I can, help them understand what's going on, because it's not easy to kind of figure it out today. We're just continue to do that.
Very cool. And not surprising that, it's that the two of you came together to decide to write this book and to really respond to the Communist Manifesto. When hearing both your backgrounds, it kind of makes sense and a good fit. But I'm curious as to how this whole thing came about, how the two of you really decided to collaborate, and why you selected, writing this type of book specifically as a response.
Yeah, Mark and I had connected a while back, and I think it was right during sort of like the peak of the hysteria in 2020, and we jumped on a podcast and had a great conversation. We kind of kept in touch, throughout all that time, throughout the Bitcoin conference in Miami, and then we were actually in El Salvador a couple months before Bitcoin became legal tender, and Mark was actually mentioned to me like, "You read the Communist Manifesto?" And I was like, "Why the hell would I read that stupidity?" And he's like, "It's really bad." And I was like, "I'm sure it is." And, we just sort of had this conversation. Yeah, I don't know. I think Mark floated the idea, or I floated. We just sort of had a chat about, like, someone. I think it was maybe the first comment was like, someone should write a book that just kind of like rebuts this thing. And yeah, it wasn't until 6 months later, I was in Colombia, had some changes in my life due to, my own disagreements with the state and the way it operates, particularly in Australia. And I was basically making a conscious decision to go lean more into content creation starting 2022. And I just told Mark, I said, "Hey, let's get together. Let's write this fucking thing. I think we've got a book here, and I think it needs to be written." And it was really unique because I don't think either of us really knew what was going to come out of it. Like we locked ourselves in an Airbnb for a week, and I'd gone and taken a bunch of notes before that were like point by point rebuttals of like Marx, and we got together and like, okay, what the hell are we going to do? How are we going to do this? We had no idea what it was going to be called. We were talking like the Individualist Manifesto or the Sovereignty Manifesto, and like all the names just sounded crap. Anyway, we just started writing, and somehow what came of it, and this is sort of, I hear people read sections of the book without sounding like I'm blowing smoke up either of our asses. Like, the book actually is pretty well written, and it's eloquent, and it isn't just the rebuttal of Marx's points. It's actually its own sort of manifesto. It's like a manifesto of individual freedom, responsibility, property rights, and maturity. Like, if anything, like the things that we want civilization and humanity to move towards. So anyway, yeah, we just kind of put that together, and then the way the name came about was actually Mark's wife. We were sitting there having some food over in Austin, and we were kind of throwing around a name, and she's like, "What about the Uncommunist Manifesto?" And it was just one of those, classic moments. We were just looked at each other, we're like, "Shit, that's good." And here we are.
Yeah. Yeah. He summed it up really well. That kind of covers everything. I think the one thing was, he mentioned, the 2020 pandemic and whatnot. And I had, studied lots of books on capitalism, mostly capitalism, some on communism, the historical effects of communism, Bolshevik Revolution, Mao's Great Leap Forward, etc. Some into communism itself. One great book is like The Naked Communist. I think is a really good book for people to read. But I hadn't actually read the Communist Manifesto, and I remember, I think maybe the trigger for me that got me kind of interested was in right around there in 2020 when we were having like all those BLM riots. And the leaders, the girls, the ladies that were running BLM said they were trained Marxists. That was their quote. So I'm like, what does that even mean, trademark? What is Marxism? And so like, well, let's go back to the source. Like, I believe we should go back and read it. And so I did. And so I read it. And then I was like, I can't believe anybody would actually read this book and actually like it, especially women. And they were the ones that said they were trained Marxists. And so that's where I read it and I was shocked. And then, yeah, as Alex said, I'm like, man, can you believe, I asked him, like, can you believe what's in this book? And I felt like if we could shine the light on it, because people are just kind of going along with it. Like, oh yeah, sounds great. Sounds great. Like people tell them, Marxism is where everybody's fair. Everyone's equal. Oh, I like that. I'm for Marxism then. Right. But it's like, do you really understand what it is? And I thought if we could shine the light on it, and show people like this is really what it is. It's not just everyone has unicorns in their backyard and we're all equal. It's like, no, it's much different. So if we could shine the light on what it really is, and then maybe highlight a better way, maybe we could kind of wake people up to it. And so I guess that was kind of the deep down motivation for me and the trigger point there.
Yeah, but I would agree with both of you. The book definitely, while it is a response to the Communist Manifesto, it definitely stands on its own too. It does kind of outlay a path forward. I forget which one of you said it, but it's really, a responsible life, understanding delayed gratification, things like that. I think there's some great lessons in the book. But I want to start with a unique characteristic that you don't see very often in books, with several pages of definitions at the beginning, which I think is interesting, and I think it's a good idea, in that when discussing ideas like this, there is often so much confusion around terms. What do we mean by inflation? Are we talking about price inflation? Are we talking about monetary inflation? What do we mean by capitalism? I mean, capitalism is a very difficult word to define, and it gets defined incorrectly, I think, by most people. So what was the impetus behind deciding to include those definitions?
I would say it was probably more credit to Alex on that piece. I would think, I guess maybe I gave him credit. I should let him answer. I would just say, originally it was like, I have personally thought that the word capitalism is so misunderstood, and it's so misunderstood that I've been changing my language to just say like free markets, which I think are more descriptive. And I think that was a point that Alex and I first discussed. And I was like, we should probably abandon that word and kind of use free markets. And Alex is like, no, we need to like defend that word. We need to make capitalism great again, and we should really defend that word. And so I think maybe that was kind of the inspiration for it, and we decided to stick with that word and really dig out the definition. Alex, I don't know, go ahead and talk about the rest.
Yeah, there was that, and I think there was a bunch of terms that we were using throughout to try and make the point. And what I felt was like, shit, I'm using all these words like forcing function and like, adaptability and fitness and all this stuff. So I just sat down and I thought, man, we got to like, we have to define these terms. Like we can't just say these things. And that was one of the things that really pissed me off about Marx's book, and really pisses me off about a lot of books, is that they go in and they bunch of around. And I guess this is probably a big reason why Mark and I get along, is that we're not surface level people. Like when we talk about ideas, or when we want, like Mark is great at this when he does research. Like when he's going to discuss a point, Mark will kind of like dig through the cycles of history and like a million things and kind of like get to the source of what happened. And for me, like, so Mark's more a historian in that sense. For me, I'm more about like precision in an argument and precision around language. So while I don't go into sort of the detail and, digging through the history, I like to get to sort of like an a priori idea, is like, where did the idea actually spawn from? And I think that combined, just led us down this path of, hey, let's actually define some terms. And I think what we did that was special in this is that we didn't just go and like Google definitions, like what does Merriam-Webster say, for what is capitalism, right? Like we actually sat down and thought about it. And this is where I feel like, I personally got a lot out of the process, because I actually stopped to think for a minute. Like fitness is one of the ones we use in there. And I was thinking about fitness. People just think of fitness as like some either elitist, trope, or like something you do when you go to the gym. And like, I just thought deeply, I'm like, fitness, what is fitness? It's like, well, it's that which fits. And that which fits means it's like the most adaptable or the most right for the situation. So like fitness in essence is like something moral, like it's correct, you know, if morality is something that is correct. And anyway, I think there's some strong definitions, and capitalism, I think, was also another one of my favorite ones in there. Is as we were throwing this idea around, I actually remember where the seed of that idea actually hit me was when I was writing an essay basically disparaging democracy as a stupid idea. Someone pushed back. Someone was commenting on my essay and they said something about capitalism. Well, if you say that about communism, you have to say it about capitalism. I was like, no, I don't think you do, because capital is, you know, things and stuff, and capitalism is about using the things and stuff better. Like, and then, you know, as Mark and I discussed it, we're like, wait a minute, we've been doing this from the beginning of time. Like, so, and then that was kind of the light bulb moment. And I think that's one of the strong takeaways. I'm sorry if I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but like one of the strong takeaways of the book is this idea that capitalism is not a political modality. It's not something that we came up with, you know, 200 years ago when Marx was around, that, you know, spawned the Industrial Revolution. We've been doing capitalism since the beginning of time, since the first time we, you know, the example we always use is since the first time we threw a stick at an animal to, you know, decrease the amount of energy we expended in the acquisition of food, and then the division of labor, which is, you know, again, capitalism, since the first time someone started a fire and we shared the food with the guy who started the fire. Like, this is what we do. And the extent to which we suffocate that process is the extent to which a political wrapper around it is either effective or not effective. And that's really the question here. And that's what we try to do in the book, is like, let's separate this stuff and let's have an actual discussion about politics without infecting the ideology with, like, you know, economic illiteracy, basically. And yeah, I think we did a good job with the definitions at the very least, and then the rest of it.
Yeah. And I would just add to that just one more time. It's that, you know, in today's day and age, we've lost so much. We've lost the definitions of words, and all the words are being changed, right? The definitions of words are being changed. And so it's one big problem. Like we see more and more throughout the world is like people are talking past each other simply because we just have different definitions of those words in our head. And so kind of like Alex said, like these were words that were going to be used throughout the book. And so we thought, let's just establish what we mean by these words. So that way everyone can kind of understand what we're saying, as opposed to reading it, but then having their own definition of those words. So I think it's important. It's more important now than ever with these words changing. And so I think hopefully it makes sense to people reading the book. I think hopefully it's also a takeaway. I mean, our goal was to keep the book short, and hopefully there's a few key takeaways people could have. And one of those might be, hey, before you dig into a conversation, make sure you're talking the same language. Make sure your definitions are the same before you start trying to dig into ideas or dispute information, things like that. Yeah.
And I just want to insert right here, but at the end, we'll talk about it too. But we'll talk about some of the ideas in the book. But obviously, I would encourage people to go out and buy the book and read it. Of course, the two of you are anti-IP. So at the end of the day, you want the book to get shared as much as possible. But so we'll talk about some of the ideas. Obviously, we're not going to get to everything in an hour here today. One part that I thought was really cool, and I think that is a lot of people don't understand, where you talk about how Marx and Engels really got the foundation wrong around human nature and what motivates human beings, and them thinking that, you know, humans are motivated, you know, strictly or mostly by power, and you stating, I think correctly, that humans are motivated by meaning, by progress. Could you expand on that idea and really how you came to including that in the book?
Mark, do you want me to take that one, or?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, okay. So I think, I mean, this sort of comes back to, there's three schools of psychological thought that, you know, also emerged out of Vienna, out of Austria. You've had what was it? You had Freud, you had Alfred Adler, and you had after them during World War II, you had Viktor Frankl. And Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Social Meaning, is quite powerful. Now, the thing is, you do, the drive for power and the drive for meaning in some way are related. I think meaning is deeper. because meaning is kind of the substance. Power is the means, in a sense. And sort of the substance, I think, is far deeper. But I think you look at people like Marx, is that they, their shallowness in terms of the understanding of human nature basically then is reflected in the rest of their thinking. And I mean, a great example is that, this attempt to just, if we just remove privation, everyone's going to be happy. Like that's how we solve everything. It's like give everyone what they basically need, their basic needs, and then everyone will be happy. And that is so false. And I think Jordan Peterson does a good example, a good job of explaining this. I think I saw him talk about it in one of his lectures, where he just says in many ways, and I'm going to paraphrase and probably butcher what he said, but he says, in many ways, human beings are seeking to continue seeking. And that process of seeking is, what are we seeking? We're seeking meaning in that which we do. And this is what the Marxists don't understand. And Mark and I have said this in podcasts in the past. It's like, Marxism, communism, this sort of collectivist ideology, it all sounds nice and fluffy on the surface. It's like sort of first order thinking. It's rarely second order thinking, and it's never third or fourth or subsequent order thinking, right? Like to have some depth in thought, you actually need to think beyond that and sort of come back to substances. It's like, what do people actually crave? What do they want internally? What needs are they trying to meet? And, that sort of stuff is all ignored by the Marxists, and it's ignored at the cost of, what do we know, 100 million lives, just in democide, across, 2 nations, let alone everywhere else around the world. So when people say that, definitions don't matter, and like, not thinking too deeply, ignorance is bliss, and, it doesn't matter. Like, no, it does. Because, these sorts of ideas, this sort of ignorance, this sort of first order thinking has led to by far the greatest atrocities. Like, everyone focuses on the Nazis, but they miss the fact that maybe 20, 30, 40x people were like literally slaughtered and killed by the ideologies on the other side of the spectrum. So it's wild. Anyway, I've gone on for a rant there. I'll shut up for a moment.
Anything to add on that, Mark?
No, I mean, I think he summed it up pretty well.
Okay. So talking about hierarchies, and, obviously, you guys have the diagrams in the book showing different hierarchies over time and how they've evolved from feudalism to, the modern day hierarchy of having your elites, your politicians, and your banks at the top, and down from there. And you propose this new idea of a dynamic, I think you call it a dynamic hierarchy or dynamic social mobility. So can you explain? And it's like to visualize it, I guess, for the people. It's circular instead of triangular, with movement between the classes. So could you explain that idea?
Yeah, I think in today's day and age, with all the words of equality and diversity, this Marxist dream of everybody being equal is a big scam, right? It's just a big lie. Like, nobody's equal, and we all have different hierarchies. Everything in life is done off of hierarchies. We're all unequal at different things and different times. Alex is holding up the diagram, but it's not really
kind of see it.
There goes a little bit.
There you go.
And so we always have hierarchies. We're always prioritizing. We're always discriminating. Last night at Chipotle, I discriminated over chicken, and I picked steak instead. Right. So we're always discriminating.
You're racist.
I'm racist against chickens, right? I wanted steak. And so we're always discriminating. I wore brown jeans instead of blue jeans today, right? And so it's like I decided to wear, whatever. So we're always discriminating. We're always creating hierarchies. And things are always equally out of balance as they are in balance. So the diagrams show like, different types of systems, feudal systems, et cetera, which are controlled and kind of managed, centrally planned, top down. And we showed a circular. And the reason why is because everybody's at different stages. And we think like the middle is probably the fattest part. That's kind of where the average person is, fat in the middle. And that's kind of why it swells in the middle. But we think that it should be dynamic, where people are able to move up and down. And so again, we're not all equal, and we shouldn't be all equal. I would imagine Jeff Bezos probably worked 80 hours a week for 20 years to get to where he got. And while everybody wants his riches, does everybody want to work that much? Because I certainly don't, right? Some people just want to be on a beach in Nicaragua surfing and fishing every day. And that's fine. And they should be able to do that if they want. Like, we shouldn't all have to work equally. And so we don't all have the equal outcome. LeBron James is a better basketball player than I am. Like, it's just, things are unequal. And so, but what we kind of use those diagrams for is to show that in a political system, they try to force order. They try to force the hierarchy. And then those hierarchies are static, right? And so if you're born in this class, you're stuck in this class and nobody can move up from that class. Whereas we believe that people should be able to move up, which we kind of have in a capitalist system. But what we have specifically in the United States and most of the developed democracies, we don't have the ability to fall back down, right? And so the fiat money system allows these people to have no consequence at the top. As we're recording this interview, Facebook or Meta has just posted massive losses. Like, they're just getting absolutely smashed right now. Mark Zuckerberg made bad bets. He went into the metaverse and he's losing big time. And in that type of environment, he should have responsibility in those decisions. He could potentially lose his company, lose his money, and he could fall back down. But what we see, like I said, in this democracy, this fiat money system, is then we have these people, bankers, et cetera, make these bad decisions, but the fiat money system bails them out, props them up. They use government regulations to build walls around themselves. And so, we don't like that system, obviously. And that's what the diagrams show, is that we should have this dynamic system where people can move up and down at the same time.
I just want to add one thing to this. It's as Mark was talking about the choosing between steak and chicken at Chipotle, or different genes or whatever. Like, it actually reminded me of a book that I read, which was it was a fictional book about a period in it was kind of like the early Bolshevik takeover of Russia, and it's called A Gentleman in Moscow. Good little book. And this guy basically gets under house arrest for almost the entirety of his life because he was a noble aristocrat from the previous sort of nobility in Russia before the Bolsheviks came in. And he had written a poem that was anti-monarchic or something like that. So they allowed him to live under house arrest in this hotel. But anyway, the part that I'm getting to is the communists, the way they tried to solve the problem of discrimination for everything was just to equalize everything and remove choice. So they abolished all the different flavors of food, for example, ice cream, and they only had vanilla. With the wines, they literally paid people to go downstairs in the cellars, and from the hundreds of different wine selections that they had, they paid them to go and remove the labels from every single bottle of wine and call it red or white. That was it. So everything was either red or white. There wasn't a choice between which reds or, so you have wines that were aged for 50 or 100 years versus a shitty wine next to it that was like not aged or whatever, were the same thing, all red, all white. So this is like how ridiculous that kind of ideology is. It's basically the elimination of color, the elimination of flavor, the elimination of diversity in the world for the explicit purpose of removing something they think is bad, called discrimination. And it's so nonsensical, it's so mindless, it's so stupid that you think it's a joke, but they actually did this stuff. And you see it in their architecture. Like you go to places like I was at a Bitcoin conference recently, and there was a friend of mine saying, he went through Bulgaria, and he's like, I just can't believe it's like all the buildings look the same. It's this ugly, brutalist, dead, drab-looking architecture. I'm like, yeah, that's it. They standardized everything. There's no choice, no color, nothing. Like box, box, box. You're lifeless, and it's such a disgusting way to live.
It's the elimination of choice, right? And I mean, I can't help but think when you talk about, all buildings looking the same, housing developments today in the United States. I mean, they all look exactly the same. You drive down a cul-de-sac and you have 10 houses that, maybe they can pick different color shutters. That's their choice, but everything else exactly the same. And why are we there? We're there because of the regulations and the way the market is with malinvestment and the Federal Reserve manipulating interest rates and the housing market. It's just the whole thing's just a mess. But it's interesting because that's the direction. You see it happening in our culture. You can see it happening with our politics in this country. So it's very, very scary. And with that in mind, I mean, I think the two of you have stated, have really outlined in this book the wrong path and the right path. And we can talk a little bit more about Bitcoin in a minute, and maybe that'll be part of this answer. But how do we change paths? How do we get off of the path we're going down in the United States and in most of the developed world into this sort of cronyist, communist corptocracy to one of more, centered around localism and sovereign individualism?
I mean, you bankrupt idiots.
I mean, you're jumping right to the end, the punchline.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
I think it was a long road to get here, and it's a long road to get out. But I think Aleks is, he gave the punchline, right? It's at the end of the day, and that's kind of where I started out with my intro. Was like I finally felt hope, right? Like we finally have a way that we can affect change, because at the end of the day, as I already kind of said with the dynamic inequalities or structures, the fiat money system is what empowers that system to be there. And so you have to take away that system. And as like F.A. Hayek said, it can't be done by force, rather a sly roundabout way, introducing something that can't be stopped. And so you can't just take the fiat money system away. No one's ever going to vote for that. No politician will ever win with a platform of reducing welfare, payments, right? So that's never going to happen by choice. It's only going to happen by force. And so the system that we have will crash. Something else is going to have to be tried. Obviously Bitcoin is there, and as Aleks eloquently said, you bankrupt them. I think, there's steps to get there. So obviously education is a big piece of that. And so that's obviously what, this book is for. And so I think if we can get more people thinking about this the right way, it starts there. And that's really where Marxism won, right? So when communism was defeated in the 70s and the 80s, but really, if you go back to the 60s, communism jumped into like any good parasite, realizing that the host is dying, it just jumps into the next host, and it just found its way right into America, right into the education system. And so it launched in the education system, knowing that you start by educating people the right way, or what they considered was the right way. And so now all those people that went through that Marxist training have now found themselves in media and banking and politics. And so I think in order to fight that, we also have to do it through education as well, which is what Aleks and I both focus on, is education. And so we change it that way. But education, knowledge isn't power. Only knowledge that's actionable is power. So we have to give them the education, but then they also need a tool in order to affect that change. And like I said, no one is ever going to vote or win on a vote, win a vote saying that we're going to cut your payments or cut your entitlements. The only way is through force, and so Bitcoin may be the only way.
Yeah, it's through not coercive force, but by voluntary force, right?
Well, I mean, yes. I mean, it's voluntary to adopt into Bitcoin. It's coercive in a sense where it would force the change, because if they can't just print money to go pay for these things, then they have no choice but to not pay for things. So it kind of forces their hand. But to your point, yes, it's not coercive. It's optional.
Yeah, the way I would describe it is kind of like gravity, right? So it's like Bitcoin's this sort of force of economic force of nature. That's probably how I'd put it. And sort of what any intelligent human being would do. Like if you, and I always use this example with gravity, right? You go to the edge of a cliff, and as an intelligent human being, you don't jump. Or if you do want to jump, as an intelligent human being who is interested in self-preservation, you put a goddamn parachute on. Like if you jump without the parachute, you're dead. So basically, with Bitcoin, you don't go and send your Bitcoin to a random address. You don't squander it. You don't waste it. You think twice about it because you can't get it back. There's no Bitcoin support hotline to call. And number two is that there's no way to socialize the loss via the creation of more units, via the issuance of more units. And because those two roads are closed off, what it does is every holder of Bitcoin has to think about what they're actually doing and has to orient themselves in a way to acquire more points in the economic game of life, and do it in the most, how can I say, the most adept way. And generally the most adept way is to either trade with someone or to beat them over the head with a stick and take their shit. But Bitcoin is also like, while I can steal your Bitcoin, it's very, 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 very difficult because you might be someone who's memorized his passphrase and holding all their wealth in their head. So if I beat you over the head with a stick, then I've lost it. So I've actually gained nothing. So it really, like, it chops off the issuance piece. It chops off the support piece, right? So no one can give it back to you. It severely minimizes the taking by force piece, and it kind of, creates a situation where everyone needs to orient themselves in such a way that in order to win the economic game of life, you need to trade. And lo and behold, all of civilization starts to move or reorient itself that direction. So, if you think of money being the ultimate scorecard of civilization, like we are all like, the money and wealth reflects, the position, status, progress, value input, and all of that sort of stuff in civilization. If we can fix that piece, it's almost, and that's why I think of it like gravity, almost like a light for, like a North Star, right? Everyone starts to orient a little bit more towards it. And I think we're all underestimating the magnitude of impact that'll have after multiple generations. Like there's a lot of people who are too impatient. They're like, oh, Bitcoin's been around for 13 years and look, the world is still fucked. It's like, all right, relax for a bit. Like Bitcoin's up against the biggest powers that have ever existed. The central banks, the largest democratic states, communist states. Like Bitcoin has got big fucking enemies that are going to take a long time to erode and defeat. And it's also got to do it in a way that is actually peaceful and non-violent. That's not going to happen overnight. I don't know what some people sort of think. Mm-hmm. They're like, oh, okay, I'm going to create my own token and, I'm going to beat Bitcoin. It's like, no. You missed the whole fucking point. The innovation of Bitcoin is that it takes the money, which is the most important technology for a social species. Like you can't have a social species without some medium of exchange, some mechanism to store value. So if money is the technology that solves that, Bitcoin is like energy money because it converts energy into money directly in a way that can't be fraudulently counterfeit or issued, and in a way that there's no rewind button. So that's like mind-blowing. You institute that in civilization, but you do it in a peaceful way where people actually opt in to buy Bitcoin, not where you force them to use Bitcoin. So it's like Bitcoin's ticking all of these boxes, one after the other. And as we progress, because people opt into store, the product of their labor, their savings in Bitcoin, and there's a fixed amount, the purchasing power of Bitcoin increases, which means it's got its own positive feedback loop built into it to attract more people. So it does its own marketing by virtue of its existence. And in doing so, it actually defunds the state and it defunds all these institutions because they're not participating in that increase in purchasing power the holders are. It is the most elegant, the most perfect, the most important, the the only way like we actually get to this. Now, all the other stuff is ancillary. Like, so, we must educate, we must, alternative energy, food, like all these sort of parallel systems are necessary along the way. But Bitcoin's kind of like the keystone. Like you have to build a bridge, but it's that keystone that sits in the middle that actually makes the bridge possible. And that's where I think a lot of people, particularly in the libertarian circles and Austrian circles, like they should be rejoicing that something like Bitcoin has actually emerged and has withstood 13, 14 years of attacks, constant attacks, and it's stronger, more anti-fragile than ever before. Like people should be rejoicing. And I hope that this podcast and the book and the work that people are doing kind of awakens the libertarian and Austrian economic sort of community to this fact. Like there is nothing more important. Like going and creating another shitcoin and sitting there talking about, oh, it's a free market, we can do whatever we want. It's like, no, you missed the damn point. You're no better than the Federal Reserve. You're just printing your own fucking money. Whereas this is a real opportunity to do exactly what you asked. It's like, how do we get out of this conundrum? Well, we starve the state, we educate ourselves, we think, we build other parallel systems, but this is the silver bullet in the middle of all the other lead bullets. So rant over.
Yeah. I think you bring up great rant, first of all, but I think you bring up a really good point. I think it was in the early part of the rant where you were talking about, we need to have a long time horizon. We can't be looking for short-term results. And the people that we're up against, the so-called elites who are, maybe now they're plotting the implementation of central bank digital currencies and things like that. They're not thinking short term; they're thinking long term as well, and that's the type of people that we have to outlast. So, definitely agree with that. I do want to do a little pivot here to a different idea in the book. So, talking about the idea of the competent individual, and it kind of comes back to that idea of responsibility, which is, I think, an area where a lot of libertarians and anarchists, I don't think, spend enough time talking about it and teaching about it, because in order to have this type of society, you can't have a society that's going to be prosperous and successful unless you have competent individuals, right? So can you talk a little bit about really the different characteristics between maybe an incompetent individual and a competent individual?
A lot of it, as Aleks was just kind of talking about, the Bitcoin and some of the changes that happens, is it changes like incentives, right? So it changes incentives. And so I just spent a week down in Mexico, just got back Tuesday and day before yesterday. And, I was talking with one of the local Mexicans there, and we met this group of Venezuelans that are walking and riding buses from Venezuela trying to get to the United States. And they're like 18 and 20-year-olds, and there was a whole group of them. And they walked across this part of Central America called the Darien Gap, or the Black Forest, that like you can't get through. And they were showing me pictures, pretty amazing. But like they're trying to get to America. And we were talking with some of the Mexicans and them, and I was explaining how like America is like this welfare state, right? So if they come, we give welfare and we give education, we give healthcare, all these things. And in Mexico or Venezuela, they don't have that. Right. And so they are forced to become a competent individual. They are forced to go provide for themselves, to learn. It's on them. Right. And unfortunately, in the United States, with the welfare system and also what Marxism promotes, which I think is also why it's so infectious, is that it promotes people to be lower versions of themselves. It leads into their sinful natures, such as greed and envy and sloth. And like Marx says, that each according to their ability, each according to their need. So, hey, just whatever you can do, just do, and you're going to have everything that you need. Just be lazy, provide whatever you want, and you'll just get everything you need. All those rich people, you're going to get all their stuff. That's the envy part, right? The greed. You're going to get all that stuff. And so it really incentivizes people to be incompetent or be low versions, be lazy, be slothful, be envious, be greed, use the state to go confiscate from the rich people, give me everything I need for doing nothing. Whereas we want to encourage people, and this book is really, as you said, we didn't really dig into the piece, but this book isn't really a refutal of the original book. It's a standalone book, that one that we hope provides, a message of hope, but really also motivation for people to become better versions of themselves, to be competent, to realize that they do have some stuff to offer, and they need to take responsibility for that. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx says that the poor, the proletariat, they have nothing to offer but their labor. Their labor never equals capital. But we say, well, that's not true. Maybe it was during the time when he wrote the book in the Industrial Revolution, at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. But today, I have intellectual capital. That's worth a lot. Right? I have ideas. Those are worth a lot. And so we think that people should become more competent. And to the point that you made in the question, which is that's really how we can change the world. We need to have a society of competent people.
Well put. So something that I've been doing recently on these podcasts, and especially when we're talking about a book, because there's going to be, especially with a book like this, it's packed so full of so many important ideas. There's stuff that we can't talk about, stuff that we miss. So I like to ask my guests for, if there's something that I didn't ask a question about that you feel is really important for the audience to know. It could be a nugget. It could be something expansive that you want to talk about. This is a podcast, so don't feel limited. But I want to ask each of you, and we'll start with Aleks. Is there something that I didn't ask you about, an idea, a part of the book that you were hoping I would today, so you would have the time to really shine a light on it?
We did the capitalist thing. Let me think, Mark. If you've got one in your mind, I'm happy for you to take it while I think of it.
One thing I have in mind that I think was a really we have a diagram for it in the book here. We tried to keep the same structure as the original book, so it's still 4 chapters, and each chapter kind of talks about the same context, I should say, but not refuting point by point, but rather just a new way to look at things. And we drew a diagram. Trying to find it here, the real spectrum, as we call it. Yep. Here. And what we were trying to show here, and back to kind of the definitions and trying to save the word capitalism, is really digging in and saying, look, capitalism is not a political modality. Capitalism is just natural emergent life. That's just natural emergent order. Like humans, we're creative and we're always trying to become more efficient, right? We're trying to create a wheelbarrow so I don't have to carry a bunch of things by hand, right? Things like that. And and so what we did is we kind of drew politics over here, with left being whatever, socialism, communism, right being fascism, Democrats, Republicans, whatever. It's all politics, which is all, centrally planned top-down control. And capitalism's over here. It's just natural emergent order. And so I think that was a big piece. And so we kind of talked about that being not even apolitical, but really anti-political. And lately in the Bitcoin community, there's this whole push to like make Bitcoin for progressives and this and that. And it's like, it's not for conservatives, not for progressive. It's just natural. It doesn't need to be assigned to this political party. And I think, or maybe I hope that more people will wake up to this. Obviously, I hope this book helps people wake up to this fact that all of this talk on politics is just kind of a waste of time. And it really just pits us against each other. And really, we want a system that's away from politics, where we can be individuals, we can be free. And then again, I think, Bitcoin gives us that kind of thing. So I think that diagram and that core concept is one that I think I'd like people to get out of the book.
Cool. I thought of mine. One is a comment on the competence thing that you said earlier. So I was at a conference recently about it was the Free Private Cities Foundation. They put it on in Prague, and it was basically a conference where, all sorts of interesting people came, and, all sorts of weirdos, like, the Liberlands and the seasteading, and, there was a good blend of people, but basically all with the common desire to, live a life that is not, I guess, imposed where you're not imposed upon by the state, effectively. And there was a lot of good stuff. But when I got up, I did my talk on the importance of responsibility, because if you renounce responsibility, you inadvertently actually drop freedom. And I don't think a lot of people realize that. There's always talk about freedom, but everyone misses the other side of the coin, which is if you want to acquire more freedom, you actually have to take on responsibility. And I think that's actually where it starts, is you take the responsibility on for yourself for different things. This is why something like Bitcoin is so important. It's responsible money. Like, you hold the key, you run your node, and then you are the fucking bank. And you want more freedom in your food, you go and farm the food, go get to know your farmer if you have to. That's sort of how you solve that. But one of the things I mentioned on there, which was, I'm glad you pulled up the competence piece, is that I think where a lot of the freedom movement is lacking is that it's lacking people or personas that are inspiring. Like, if we want to get the world to want to think more libertarian or think more freedom oriented, is people need to be inspired by us. They need to want to be like us. Like, we need to embody virtues like excellence and greatness and responsibility, because that's the thing that draws people. We don't need to be, a bunch of weirdos just read a couple books on Austrian economics and Mises, argue with each other, and then just go back to living normal lives or whatever we're doing, right? There needs to be something that draws people. So I think that's number one. But then coming back to the book, there is something unique we did in the book, which was, kind of like a counter to Marx's book. Is at the end of chapter 2, he's got his 10 points of communism. And I would encourage everybody to go and look at the 10 points of communism, and they'll find a bunch of things in there that they probably were not expecting, because they are evident and they actually make up part of the structure of so-called Western free capitalist civilization today. Things like progressive tax rates, things like education mandated by the state, things like a central bank, things like communications being run by the state. All of these things, and Marx said this in the past, is basically 6 or 7 out of the 10 the US actually has. And people say that that's the paragon of capitalism. It's more communist than it is capitalist. Right. And what we did was we gave our 10 points of basically freedom and responsibility, for lack of a better term, or the 10 uncommunist points, which is the preservation of the absolute preservation of private property, the right to defend oneself, the use and adoption of a monetary standard that can't be manipulated or controlled or run by someone, all these sorts of things in there, educate grassroots education, basically. So the right and the ability to educate as you see fit, not by some status mandates. So all of these things. So I'd encourage people to definitely check out the Communist 10 points, then stop and think for a minute and be like, what do you see around the world? And then pick up our book if you so wish, and see what we've sort of written out, and just ask yourself, literally, what do you think would move the world more towards heaven, and what do you think will move the world more towards hell, based on those 10 points? And then make a conscious decision on for yourself, which sort of list of ideologies, or I shouldn't say ideologies, which list of ideals would I prefer to live in accordance with, for the good of the world. So anyway, that's a point I think it's pretty important.
Awesome. Well, we're running low on time here, so I want to give you each a chance to give your plugs. I mean, number one, where can people buy the book, and then also your personal plugs, where they can find you on social media and your other work. So if you want to go first, Mark.
Yeah. So for sure, go get the book. It's on Amazon. Just search Uncommunist Manifesto on there. Get a copy. We've priced it cheap. We're capitalists, but we just want to get the word out as best as we can. We'd ask if you could just leave a review. That'd be great. You can come back to the website, uncommunist.com, and then get access to a bunch of extra behind the scenes freebies, recordings, dialogue, things like that. So check those out. As far as for me, just at the number one, at one Mark Moss.com. You can find everything there, or on social media at one Mark Moss. I'm pretty active on Twitter and Instagram, so you can check me out there. Oh, and then just on YouTube, just search Mark Moss as well.
All right, Alex.
Sweet. My one, I mean, Mark already outlined where to get the book from, and all there's some real good bonuses, like some behind the scenes stuff that Mark and I did, like when we're actually writing the book. We recorded some interviews. We've actually got a list of all the podcasts we've been on, so this will go on there as well. If people want to check out all the different discussions. We've been on some cool ones. We were actually on Alex Jones, which was hilarious. So if anyone wants to see that one was really good.
That was before he was sued for, or before he lost the lawsuit for $1 billion. And
yeah, apparently
insanity.
Yeah, absolute insanity. So yeah, there. And then my stuff. I guess I have a link tree, so linktree.com/Svetski, just my surname. But I think I'm about to set up Svetski.info. So by the time this comes out, that might be available, so people can just type that in. They can see all my links there. But my Twitter is Svetski Writes. So writing like WRITES. If they want to check that out. So yeah.
All right, Mark Moss, Aleks Svetski, the Uncommunist Manifesto. Thank you guys for coming on Finding Freedom.
Thanks,
Thank you,
John. Appreciate it.
All right. Hope you enjoyed that episode of Finding Freedom. I really did. And, these guys reached out to me a couple months ago, had a little bit of trouble booking this. They're both living, one on the West Coast and one traveling around different parts of the world. So we had some trouble getting this on the calendar. But, man, I was really, really happy with this interview and really enjoyed the conversation. And the book itself, we didn't get to everything in it. There's a lot we did not get to discuss, but a tremendous book. And really, to be perfectly honest, much, much better than I expected the book to be. Just the ideas that were discussed, really, it wasn't just debunking the Communist Manifesto. It was really mapping out the opposition to it and how we win. So that's what I am all about here at Finding Freedom. I know that's what you are all about, listening to this show every single week. So thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in again as you do. Please subscribe on the Lions of Liberty Network feed or on the Finding Freedom solo feed. And with that said, let's get on out of here. Always remember to keep your head up and the fires of liberty burning.